Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim, Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on the bottom of the Lamed bit, Amud bit, by Tan Rabbanan. About 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shlema for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, for Michael Ben Nahid, and for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, that should all have Refuah Shlema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. And also today's Amud is dedicated for Ilui Neshama of Rachel Chaya Bat Netanel, that her Neshama should have an Aliyah Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Okay, so we are continuing on the Mishnah that we started, Hadas HaGazul. We started the halachot of Hadassim, and one of the issues that we mentioned was when the leaves are not necessarily all there. It comes dried up, and sometimes they just fall. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, Nashru Rov Alav V'nishtayeru Bo Mi'ut Kasher. If the majority of the leaves of Hadas have already fallen out, and only a minority have been left there, it's still kasher. And then the Gemara says, well, that's only with a stipulation, ubilvachte avoto kayemet. Still it has to have the avot. The avot means it's like a woven piece that the leaves are covering one another. They have to have that at the very least. That's a requirement. If you don't have maaseh avot, then it's got to be pasul. Gemara says, wait a second. How can you have the majority of the leaves that fell, and then you still have avot? You can't have it like that. The only way you could have that the leaves are covering one another is if you have the majority left. So says Gemara, Hagufa kasha. What you're saying is oxymoronic. It doesn't work. Amrat. On one hand, you say Nashru Rov Alav kasher, that if the majority fell, still is kasher. And then you stipulate to it that it has to be that you still have maaseh avot, which is not possible if the majority, if 2 out of 3 of every piece fell out in every level, every row. If 2 out of 3 fell, then you don't have maaseh avot. So says the Gemara, Kevan de natri leutere avot tere avot dechimash kachade. How can you have avot if 2 out of 3, the majority, have fallen out? So it says Gemara, Amar Abaye, Mashkachat la be'asa mitzra, or matzra. You could find it with a specific type of hadassim. You're right, a regular hadas has only 3 leaves coming out of every row, and if 2 of them fall out, then you don't have avot, correct. But you have Asa Matzra, the way Rashi explains in the first Perush, is this is a hadas that grows on the metzar, on the border of the 2 fields. So usually when you grow on the metzar, it's amazing because you don't have other trees next to it to basically take all the minerals and all the food in the ground, and you get plenty of water, plenty of dirt to yourself, and it grows more and better than a regular hadas that's in the middle of a field with a lot of other plantations. So it says, Rashi, if you take a look at the top line, Gadel al hametzar, it grows on the border of the 2 fields, shel sadeh, of the field, umitoch sheyesh lo makom panui, because there's a lot of empty space, hu mashbiach umatzliach. It's successful, it grows, it gets plenty of light, plenty of water, plenty of everything. So you end up having many more leaves in every row than 3. You have 7 of them. You have 7 leaves growing in every row instead of 3. So even if the majority of them fall, so 4 of them fall, still you have 3. That's Chazak Baruch. It's amazing, right? There are other Rishonim who explain Matzra means the Egyptian, like a Mitzrayim, or from the language of Tsar, different species of hadassim, which really has to raise an eyebrow, because since when we could have different species of one type, right? You remember how before we had that if any Shem Levi is given to an item that's no longer considered that thing. If you have, by maror we had it, right? If you have a maror that has merirot ha'agama, you remember that? We had, if it's from a swamp, it's no longer considered necessarily a kasher maror. We had a discussion back and forth. What is considered, what's not considered. So that really should raise an eyebrow right away. Why is it that the Gemara is assuming as a davar pashut, as a simple fact, that any hadas that you bring me, as long as it checks all the other boxes, it has 3 coming out of every stem, they are matching in their height, and it has all the other requirements and criteria of hadas is kasher, even if it's considered an Egyptian hadas, or a thinner type of species of hadas, or if it's growing on the metzar, doesn't make a difference. All of them will be kasher. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. But says the Gemara, be'asa mitzra, this asa mitzra, however you slice it, however you understand it, the kaimi shiv'a shiv'a be'echad kina, that in every row, in every stem, he has 7 leaves coming out from the same place. That when we say rov ha'alim nashru, when we talk about the majority of the leaves falling out, that would be 4 out of 7, and you're still left with 3. That's actually very interesting. The Bach writes that by asa mitzra, by regular hadas, if 1 out of 3 falls out, then the majority is left, it's kasher, right? So if 2 out of 3 is left, or let's say it in a different way, if 2 on every row is left, it's kasher. Says the Bach, by asa misra, if out of 7, 5 of them fell, right, and you're left with 2, it's pasul. Even though it looks the same as the other one, it says, well, once the majority of the alim, of the leaves fall out, you have to at least have 3. Right? It becomes again, this becomes one of those discussions within the poskim, that if you, let's say, have a asa mitzra, which is kasher, but you don't want to have 7 on everything, so you pick, you pluck out those things, and then you use it for one day, and 1 more of them falls out, so then perhaps it will become pasul. But be that as it may, asa mitzra, even though the 4 out of 7 falls out, you still have 3, and it's kasher l'chatchila. Amar Abaye says, Shmamina hay asa mitzra kasher lehoshana. Like our question, Abaye says, well. It sounds from here that this asa mitzra, whether it's Egyptian hadas, or it is a corner of a field hadas, or is a narrower type of a species of hadas, is kasher for Hoshana, is kasher for my lulav. So the Gemara says, Pshita, what's the chidush of Abaye? Of course it's kasher, it's hadasim. Gemara says, no, it's not, because ma'odetema, I would have thought perhaps, ho'il ve'itle shem levai, that since it has a different name, and we're going to discuss this in the next page of the Gemara at length, this concept, but we have had it before also, as we mentioned, maybe because it has a different name, it's called Hadas HaMitzri, or Hadas of the Metzar, or it's a different species that it's narrower, we might have thought that it should not be kasher, lo mit kasher, kamash malan. It's coming to teach us that no, it's good, kasher. That's the chidush of this, says the Abaye. Mar says, wait a second. Once you bring this up, it's a good question. Why taka is it kasher? It is Shem Levi, and Shem Levi always is a problem. When you have Meriruta Da'agama, it's a question. So why Asa Mitzra is not a question? It should be a question in the kashrut of this, because it's not a regular hadas. It's an Egyptian hadas. It looks different. It has 7 different alim, leaves coming out of every row. Who says it's kasher? Ve'ema achinami. Let us say that, it should be a problem. Mara says, no. It's avot amarach mara mikol makom. You remember in the beginning of this Mishnah, we said there are 2 items in the 4 species, 2 of them, the Torah does not mention what they are at all, right? By etrog, it doesn't say, it says Periyaz Hadar. We have to figure out what fruit it is. By hadassim it says, ve'anaf etz avot, a branch that has the leaves in a way that is avot. Doesn't say hadas. So if the Torah would say hadas, we would say, well, the Torah says hadas. You have to go figure out what exactly the Oxford Dictionary or the Torah Dictionary of hadas means. But it doesn't say hadas. And there's a reason that it doesn't say hadas, says the Gemara. The reason that it doesn't say hadas is he wants us to know that any etz avot of such will be kasher. Meaning your question is exactly the reason, says the Gemara, that the Torah never says hadas. The Torah just says a branch that has this leaves covering each other and the stem, and that will be kasher. So even if you have asa, matzra, or mitzra, even if you have a different type of hadas, so long as it checks all the boxes of requirements that we have for hadassim, it will be kasher. Fine. Tanu Rabbanan. Yavshu rov alav v'nish'ar bo shlosha badei alin lachin kasher. If the majority of the leaves of hadas dried up, but you still have 3 leaves, 1 row of fresh, nice leaves of hadas, then the whole stem, the whole branch is kasher. Now this is, of course, when you have the psul of yavesh is psul of hadar, right? All the leaves are there; they're still attached. So why is a hadas yavesh pasul? We mentioned this in the previous shiur, that it's pasul because it's not glorified, it's not beautiful, right? It's not hadar. It has to be hadar, and it's not hadar. So says the Gemara, that is so long as it doesn't have any nice fresh leaves. But if you have 1 row of 3 leaves that are fresh and nice, they're not dried, that would be kasher. That's already considered hadar. Enough. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda, uberosh kol echad ve'echad. We need that row of fresh, non-dried leaves are on the very top. This is the top row. The top row has to be fresh. If you have a row in the middle that is nice and fresh, but the rest it's entirely dried, that's pasul. That's not hadar. But if you have something that the bottom rows are dried up, but the top row is fresh and beautiful, that is mechaper on the whole thing. It's kasher. The whole thing becomes hadar. Fine. So says the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah that niktam rosho is pasul. If you snip the top of it, is pasul, right? No, it's not kasher. Now the Gemara says, Tani ula barchinna, niktam rosho ve'ala bot timara kasher. If you have a hadas that was niktam rosho, the tippy top of it was cut off, but now then in its place grew one of these like berry-looking things that we spoke about before. Now you have this growing on the top, this tmara, this date, or whatever growth the hadassim have, that now it looks beautiful. Now it looks natural. It doesn't look like a cut-off branch anymore. It doesn't look like a half a branch. It looks good. It looks completely natural. Something started growing there in the top. So is that kasher or pasul? So the Gemara, Ula said that if it's niktam rosho ve'al tabot timara kasher, it's kasher. Now this is going to be the beginning of a tremendously important sugya that comes up mostly actually in Masechet, in Seder Kochim, in the halachot of korbanot, and here is the application to Ilchot Sukkah, right? So says the Gemara, Bai Rabbi Yirmiyah, niktam rosho me'erev Yom Tov. Imagine before Chag HaSukkot, the top of this was cut, and on Yom Tov, the tmara grew in it. This thing grew on Yom Tov. So now it looks kasher. Now it's halachically kasher because it has this tmara growing up on the tippy top. Looks like it's a natural, normal growth. It should be kasher. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Mahu, is that kasher or not? What would be the problem, by the way? What's the problem? Now it's kasher. I didn't do anything. It became kasher by itself. Right? I may have davened for it, but I didn't do anything. It was pasul, now it's kasher, chazak u'baruch. Take it and say bracha. Well, what's exactly the problem here? The problem is a concept that the rest of the Amud is going to be dealing with it, of dichui etzel ha-mitzvah. What is this? It's got a little preface. By korbanot, we have this concept constantly coming up in Seder Kodshim, that a korban could be nitche, could be halachically cast away or pushed away, and once it's nitche, it's not so simple if it's going to be afterwards becoming kasher. Example, if you have on Yom Kippur, you have to bring two identical goats, right? Echad la'azazel and echad la'Hashem. One of them becomes shechted as a korban, a chatat, and the other one goes to Azazel, right? The Ish Iti, the elderly fellow, takes him up to Hara Azazel and throws him down, right? And that would be part of the process of the kapara, of the atonement. Now, what happens if the first korban, right? If the first korban was shechted, now you have to go sprinkle the blood, right? Now, in between the shchita and the zrikat dam, the one that was supposed to be going to Azazel, they told him what's going to happen. He had a heart attack and died, right? If the other Seir Azazel died in the middle, so that makes the first one now pasul. Even if you go and bring now not a new one for Azazel, a new Seir Azazel, you can't sprinkle the blood of the first one because they have to be, they're intact at the same time until Zirikat Damim. So if the moment that Seir Azazel died, the whole first korban became nitche, became pushed away. Once it was nitche, it's not going to be choser v'nireh. It's not going to be becoming kasher. Again, you have to start the whole process over again. You're not going to be sprinkling that blood. You have to bring two new seirim and the whole thing. That's in the process after the korban. Now, sometimes you have this process, machloket Tanaim and Amoraim over there in the Gemara, if it applies even before the korban is nikra, before the korban is shechted. So this Gemara now is a discussion whether or not this concept of dichui that we have etzel korbanot is also applicable by mitzvot. And we'll see examples in the Gemara. But one example of it would be our case over here. The moment that this was snipped, Erev Yom Tov, now this branch of Hadassim is pasul, is nitche, got pushed away. It's no good. And now afterwards, something grew in it which makes it kasher. So can I look at it and say, well, this was pushed away. Once it's pushed away, it cannot become kasher again. The halacha rejected this, and it's going to be forever gone. Or do we say, no, that's only maybe by korbanot. What's the problem? If now it's kasher, if it looks like hadas and it smells like hadas, and yeah, it's hadas, it's kasher. So says the Gemara, by Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Niktam Roshom Erev Yom Tov va'alta bo tmara b'Yom Tov ma'u. What's the halacha? If before Yom Tov it was snipped and now it has this tmara growing on the top of it, yesh dichui etzel mitzvot. Or en, is it comparable with korbanot? Do we say yesh dichui etzel mitzvot, or maybe not? So Gemara says, wait a second, why is this a question? Because I have a proof from a different Gemara that answers your question. So you shouldn't even be asking this question because you should know the answer. But Tiv Shodla, why don't you learn this? Mehaditnan, we learn in a Mishnah, in Masechet Chulin, Daf Bezayin, Kisau v'nitkala patur milechasot. This is halachot of kisui hadam. We know that when you shecht an animal, depending on what animal it is, some animals, the birds, the kosher birds, and also the kosher wild animals, like a deer, not a behemah, cows, sheep, they don't need kisui adam. But if you shecht a deer, and then you would not need to do kisui adam, you have to cover the blood, right? It's a mitzvah d'oraita. Say bracha on it. You've seen this in Erev Yom Kippur when they do kaparot. Some people pay tremendous amount to be the one, to be zoche to do the mitzvah of Kisui Adam al Pi Shulchan Aruch, the one that's the shechita is zoche to the mitzvah of Kisui Adam. But some people, because they want to add one more rare mitzvah on Erev Yom Kippur to the list of their mitzvot, that is this mitzvah of covering the blood. Now, the Gemara discusses what happens if you had a strong wind, you did the shechita, and you had a strong wind, and you had a whole lot of sand or dry dirt that came and covered the blood. So you didn't get to do the mitzvah, but it's covered now. So what do you do? Is it good or is it not good? So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, not only if the wind covered it that you're good to go, but even if the wind covered it, right? Well, so we missed the step. The Mishnah says if you covered it, you did the mitzvah, you said, like, you know, al kisui adam ba'afar, you covered the blood, and then the wind came and uncovered it. So I did my mitzvah, but now the blood is still uncovered. So the Mishnah says, in that case, you don't have to bother with it. You did your mitzvah, the wind came, it's good. You don't have to touch it. Let it be. Patur. Kisau ruach, but if originally it was covered by a wind came and covered it, and now an opposite wind came and opened it again, now you have the blood there, and you never did the mitzvah, says the Gemara, in that case, chayav lechasod, you have to go and cover it. Now, Amar, Rabbi Yochanan, we learn the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu elash chazar v'nitkala. That's only if the wind came back and opened it. Aval lo chazar v'nitkala patur milachasod. But if a wind came and covered it, you are not mechuyav to go uncover it and then cover it. Right? You're not mechuyav to do that. Even though that you didn't end up doing the mitzvah, the wind just covered it. It's covered, it's good. Now says the Gemara, Havinam, but we ask on this Gemara, in Masechet Chulin, Ki chazar v'nitkala amai chayav lechasod. Why do you even have to cover it if the wind covered it and then the opposite wind uncovered it? Why don't we say, Ho'il ve'itchi itchi? Once it was pushed away from being a mitzvah, the moment that the first wind covered this blood was pushed away from a mitzvah of Kisui Adam because it's not applicable anymore, right? So why don't we say, Ho'il ve'itchi itchi, that once the mitzvah was pushed away, I never got to do the mitzvah. But it was itchi, was pushed away the mitzvah because it was covered by a wind, and applying the concept of dichui by the mitzvot should dictate that once it was pushed away from my ability to do the mitzvah, it should be staying pushed away, and I should not reckon with it. Right? That's the question we ask on that Mishnah in Masechet Chulin. You know what the answer to that is? Listen to this. Amar Rav Papa answers that question. Zot omeret en dichui etzel mitzvot. You know what the answer is? This actually teaches you the very question that you had. You want to know if you could apply the concept of dichui from korbanot to the mitzvot? The answer is no. En dichui etzel mitzvot. By a mitzvah, if the opportunity was taken away from you because the wind covered it, if the opportunity presents itself again, right, aka the wind comes and opens it now, then you have the mitzvah. It's never pushed away, right? Conceptually, it's a tremendous thing, right? Any opportunity of the mitzvah that you have, it's never pushed away, right? The mitzvot are not pushed away. Korbanot could be, okay, but by mitzvot, you get an opportunity, presents itself, you do it regardless of what the past, the history has been. That's a powerful, powerful thing. But nevertheless, says the Gemara, you should be able to learn from this Gemara in Chulin. This is the Gemara. We just codify the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara asks and answers this question in that Mishnah. The Mishnah says if the wind covered it and uncovered it, you have to go cover it. And Gemara says, Dichu Yetzel Mitzvot. And Rav Papa says, you see from here that there is no Dichu Yetzel Mitzvot. Why can't you just cut and paste that from Chulin to Sukkot? And Chazak Baruch, and Dichu Yetzel Mitzvot. Why is it even a question? Gemara says, no. This this very Rav Papa is the question. The Rav Papa gufami bayale. Rabbi Yirmiyah knows this Rav Papa. Well, you think Rabbi Yirmiyah didn't learn Chulin? Rabbi Yirmiyah knows the Mishnah and the Gemara in Chulin. But that's exactly what he's asking. He's asking, is that Gemara applicable over here or not? Because listen well, we're going to do it outside and then we're going to read it inside. What happens in the case of Masechet Chulin, Daf Bezayin, by the case of Kisui Adam? Are you being machmir or mekel by saying that there is no dichui etzel mitzvot? Right? You had the blood. You have to, it's a chiyuv deoraita to cover the blood. Now the wind covered it, the wind uncovered it again. Now I have the blood in front of my eyes. If I say en dichui etzel mitzvot, if I say it's not pushed away, am I being stringent or lenient? I'm being stringent. You know, you have to cover it. Right? Machmir. So maybe we only say en dichui etzel mitzvot when you end up being more stringent to cover all your bases. But in our case of hadas, what's going to be the case? You had this hadas that was snipped. It became pasul. And now this temara grew on top of it. And by saying en dichui etzel mitzvot, what are you saying? You could take this and use it. Is that a chumrah or a kula? That's a kula. Maybe we only say en dichui etzel mitzvot when you end up being more stringent. Who says that we say en dichui etzel mitzvot when you end up being more mekel on a mitzvah deoraita? Who says? Maybe not. Says the Gemara. Let's read it inside together. Mifshat pshita le de en dichui etzel mitzvot lo shena lekula velo shena lechumra. Is it pashut to Rav Papa? This is the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rav Papa who said this, is it pashut to him that we say en dichui etzel mitzvot regardless of if you end up being more stringent or more mekel? Or dilma sefuki misapkale. Or maybe Rav Papa himself doesn't know what happens when you are going to be ending up with a kula. Ulechumra amrinan. Lekula lo amrinan. Maybe he himself has a safek, and therefore we will be machmir on this safek deoraita lechumra, and the Gemara ends up with a teku. Tishbi taretz kushot veibayot. Many times, by the way, with the questions of Rabbi Yirmiyah, many times the Gemara ends up with a teku. Pay attention. This is another homework for Shas homework. Let's call it right. It's another Shas homework. You will find that many times the questions. The nuanced questions of Rabbi Yirmiyah ends up being a teku, which we have to wait for Mashiach soon, Be'ezrat Hashem, to answer these.